Your blood vessels remember everything you've ever fed them, and, at 60, they're keeping score. When you pass the threshold of 60 years, your body carries within it a detailed archive of every meal, every choice, every pattern of nourishment or neglect that has shaped your internal landscape. The blood vessels that wind through your body like rivers through ancient terrain have been recording this information with perfect accuracy, and they express their memory through a gradual process we experience as stiffness, as resistance, as the quiet narrowing of pathways that once flowed with effortless ease. The endothelium, that delicate single-cell layer lining every artery and capillary in your system, becomes less responsive, less capable of the dynamic expansion and contraction that defines youthful circulation. This is not merely aging in some abstract philosophical sense, but a measurable biochemical reality, a transformation in how your vessels communicate with the blood they carry and the organs they nourish. Beetroot enters this landscape carrying within its deep crimson flesh a particular class of compounds called dietary nitrates. Molecules that seem unremarkable until you understand their journey through your digestive system. When you consume beetroot, these nitrates begin an elegant metamorphosis the moment they encounter the bacteria living on your tongue and in your saliva. These microorganisms convert dietary nitrates into nitrites, a chemical intermediary that continues its transformation as it moves deeper into your body, in the acidic environment of your stomach and later in your bloodstream. These nitrites undergo yet another conversion, this time into nitric oxide, a molecule so fundamental to vascular health that the scientists who elucidated its role received the Nobel Prize. Nitric oxide functions as a signaling molecule that tells the smooth muscle cells surrounding your blood vessels to relax, to release their grip, to allow the vessel walls to expand and create more space for blood to flow. This process becomes increasingly compromised as we age because our bodies produce less nitric oxide naturally with each passing decade. And beetroot provides an alternative pathway that bypasses the declining enzymatic systems entirely. Sonnet 4.5. Inside every cell of your body exist tiny organelles called mitochondria, a structure so small that thousands could fit on the head of a pin, yet so crucial to your survival that without them you would cease to exist within seconds. These microscopic powerhouses generate the ATP molecules that fuel every thought, every heartbeat, every breath, every movement you make throughout your day. They are the descendants of ancient bacteria that merged with our ancestral cells billions of years ago, and they retain their own DNA separate from the genetic material housed in your cell nucleus. When you are young, these mitochondria function with remarkable efficiency, converting oxygen and nutrients into usable energy with minimal waste and maximum output. But after 60, something profound happens to these cellular engines that fundamentally alters your experience of vitality and endurance. The mitochondria begin to accumulate damage to their delicate membranes and their unique DNA, damage inflicted primarily by reactive oxygen species, those unstable molecules generated as inevitable byproducts of energy production itself. Think of it as exhaust from an engine that gradually corrodes the very machinery producing it. This oxidative stress causes mitochondria to become less efficient, producing less ATP while generating more harmful free radicals in a vicious cycle of declining function. The number of healthy mitochondria within each cell decreases, and those that remain operate at diminished capacity. You feel this change as unexplained fatigue, as muscles that tire more quickly, as mental fog that descends without clear cause, as a general sense that your body no longer responds to demands the way it once did. Beetroot contains betalains, those vibrant pigments responsible for its distinctive color, and these compounds possess a remarkable ability to penetrate cell membranes and accumulate precisely where mitochondria reside. Once there, betalains function as molecular shields, intercepting free radicals before they can damage mitochondrial DNA or oxidize the lipids that form mitochondrial membranes. Research examining cells exposed to betalain compounds shows measurably reduced markers of oxidative damage and preserved mitochondrial membrane potential. That critical electrochemical gradient necessary for ATP synthesis. Inflammation represents one of the most misunderstood processes occurring within the aging body, often portrayed as simply harmful, when in fact, it serves as your immune system's essential response to injury and infection. The problem emerges not from inflammation itself, but from its persistence, from acute protective responses that never fully resolve and instead settle into a chronic low-grade state that permeates tissues throughout your body. After 60, this persistent inflammatory state becomes almost universal, measurable through elevated levels of inflammatory markers in your bloodstream like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, MOL-ECULES, that signal ongoing immune activation even when no infection or injury is present. This inflammation manifests in ways both obvious and subtle, from the morning stiffness in your joints to the brain fog that clouds your thinking, from cardiovascular strain to the inexplicable aches that seem to migrate through your body without clear origin. The betalains and other phytonutrients concentrated in beetroot, possess anti-inflammatory properties that operate through multiple pathways simultaneously, not by suppressing your immune system but by modulating its responses toward resolution rather than perpetuation. These compounds inhibit the activation of nuclear factor kappa B, a protein complex that acts as a master switch for inflammatory gene expression, essentially turning down the volume on signals that tell your cells to produce inflammatory cytokines. When you consume beetroot daily, you introduce into your system a steady supply of molecules that encourage inflamed tissues to shift from a state of alarm to a state of repair, allowing the immune system to complete its work and return to baseline vigilance rather than remaining perpetually activated. Studies examining individuals over 60 who incorporated beetroot into their daily routine documented measurable reductions in inflammatory biomarkers within 4 to 8 weeks, accompanied by subjective improvements in joint comfort, mental clarity, and overall sense of physical ease. The anti-inflammatory effects extend to the cardiovascular system, where chronic inflammation contributes to atherosclerotic plaque formation and vessel wall damage. Blood pressure represents the force your heart must generate to push blood through the network of vessels that has become progressively more resistant over decades of living. When physicians measure your blood pressure, they are capturing in 2 numbers, a story about the state of your entire circulatory system, about how hard your heart labors with each contraction and how much residual pressure remains in your arteries between beats. For most people crossing into their 60s, these numbers have been creeping upward year by year, a trend so common it is often dismissed as inevitable aging, rather than recognized as a modifiable risk factor for the most devastating health events that lie ahead. Elevated blood pressure silently damages organs throughout your body, creating microscopic injuries in your kidneys, weakening the delicate vessels in your eyes, and most critically, placing enormous strain on your heart while simultaneously increasing the likelihood that a blood vessel in your brain will rupture or become blocked. The nitric oxide generated from beetroot consumption produces a measurable and sustained reduction in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, an effect documented across numerous research trials involving older adults. Within 2 to 3 weeks of daily beetroot intake, participants consistently showed decreases, averaging 5 to 10 points in systolic pressure and 3 to 5 points in diastolic pressure, reductions that may seem modest in isolation but translate into substantially lower risk for stroke and myocardial infarction when sustained over months and years. This is not a pharmaceutical intervention with its attendant side effects and costs, but a dietary modification that works with your body's existing physiology to restore function that has been compromised. The mechanism operates through that same vascular relaxation we discussed earlier, where nitric oxide signals blood vessels to dilate, reducing the resistance your heart encounters with every contraction. Lower resistance means less pressure required to maintain adequate circulation, less strain on vessel walls, less likelihood of the catastrophic failures that manifest as heart attacks and strokes in the aging population. The brain consumes a disproportionate share of your body's oxygen and glucose despite representing only about 2% of your total body weight, a metabolic demand that reflects the extraordinary energy requirements of conscious thought, memory formation, emotional regulation, and the countless unconscious processes that maintain your sense of self and connection to the world around you. This hungry organ depends entirely on a constant supply of freshly oxygenated blood delivered through an intricate network of cerebral arteries that branch into progressively smaller vessels until they form capillary beds so dense that no neuron sits more than a few cell widths from a blood supply. As you age past 60, the vessels feeding your brain undergo the same stiffening and narrowing that affects your peripheral circulation, but the consequences here carry particular weight because neurons cannot regenerate easily and brain tissue tolerates oxygen deprivation poorly compared to muscle or skin. The increased nitric oxide availability from daily beetroot consumption enhances blood flow specifically to the frontal cortex, that region of your brain responsible for executive functions including planning, decision-making, impulse control, and working memory. Neuroimaging studies using functional MRI technology have captured this phenomenon directly, showing measurably increased perfusion in frontal brain regions among older adults following beetroot supplementation, with the enhanced blood flow correlating with improvements in cognitive testing performance. This is not imagination or placebo effect but observable physiological change. More oxygen and glucose reaching neurons that may have been operating in a state of subtle deprivation, constrained by inadequate circulation that developed so gradually you adapted to it without recognizing the loss. The implications extend beyond memory and reasoning to encompass mood, regulation, and emotional resilience, functions we rarely associate with blood flow but which depend critically on adequate neuronal metabolism. The prefrontal cortex and limbic structures involved in Emotional processing require consistent energy supply to maintain the neurotransmitter synthesis and synaptic activity that underpins stable mood and appropriate emotional responses to life's challenges.